Brock Lesnar vs. Bobby Lashley was a dream match every wrestling fan wanted for so long. WWE finally gave us that match. I mean matches, and they were all intentionally horrible. And when it was all over, Lashley was off the WrestleMania card entirely, while Lesnar was booked against someone who had been on the main roster for barely 2 years. This is the story of how Brock Lesnar's creative leverage dismantled one of WWE's most anticipated rivalries from the inside out. Let's start with the foundation, because you can't understand the Lashley situation without understanding what Lesnar actually is inside WWE's structure. Lesnar operates on a limited dates contract. He shows up for premium live events, occasionally a go-home Raw, and that's largely it. He is, by deliberate design, a special attraction, a commodity insulated from the weekly grind that makes the rest of the roster feel ordinary. The logic is sound. Scarcity creates value. You don't see Lesnar every Tuesday, so when his music hits, it still means something. But here's what that contract structure also creates: enormous, almost unilateral leverage. Because when you're only showing up a handful of times a year, every appearance is precious. Every match is a negotiation. And if the company needs you for a specific program on a specific night, and you don't want to do it, there's very little they can realistically do to force the issue. Now, the persistent backstage rumor has always been that Lesnar holds a formal creative control clause, a legally binding veto over his booking. Industry reporting, particularly from Dave Meltzer, has consistently pushed back on that, suggesting there's no such clause on paper. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter, because the de facto reality of how WWE treated Lesnar's preferences amounted to exactly the same thing. Management deferred to him. Creative worked around him. When he didn't like something, it changed. The absence of a formal clause means almost nothing when the behavioral pattern is identical to having one. And the behavioral pattern was well documented long before Bobby Lashley ever entered the picture. You can trace the shape of Lesnar's leverage through a series of moments that, taken together, form a very clear portrait. At SummerSlam 2014, Lesnar had just broken The Undertaker's undefeated WrestleMania streak. He was carrying more narrative momentum than perhaps any villain WWE had constructed in the modern era. And then, he faced John Cena for the WWE Championship. Rather than a standard back-and-forth main event, Lesnar delivered 16 consecutive German suplexes. The match was essentially a squash. Cena later confirmed this was entirely Lesnar's concept, pitched privately. Lesnar's argument was simple: a competitive match immediately dilutes everything the streak-breaking bought him. Why spend the capital the moment you earn it? The logic was actually sound. Lesnar understood his own brand better than most bookers understood it for him. But the leverage became more nakedly political in situations where it damaged people around him. At WrestleMania 32, Dean Ambrose had a no-holds-barred match against Lesnar. Ambrose came in with an elaborate, creative vision, weapons, chaos, a legitimate war. Ambrose pitched everything. Lesnar wasn't interested. The match ended up brief, controlled on Lesnar's terms, and largely forgettable. Ambrose described it publicly, bluntly: Brock just didn't want to do anything. Then there's Jinder Mahal at Survivor Series 2017. Mahal was the SmackDown champion. Lesnar was the Universal champion. Champion versus champion was the plan. Except Lesnar reportedly refused to work with Mahal. WWE's solution was to strip Mahal of the title on SmackDown and pivot Lesnar to AJ Styles instead. They changed a championship to accommodate one man's preferences. And then Crown Jewel 2018, where the entire writing team had scripted the show, including the following episode of Raw around Braun Strowman winning the vacant Universal Championship. Then, at the last minute, the decision reversed. Lesnar won. The writing team had to scrap their work overnight. Strowman's momentum never fully recovered. Individually, each of these stories sounds like an isolated incident. Together, they describe a system, and Bobby Lashley was about to enter that system with very high expectations and very little leverage of his own. Lashley's pursuit of this match was almost uncomfortably earnest. He talked about it openly. He'd been compared to Lesnar since he...
No, when I first came in, a lot of people just naturally fantasy book. They were like,
well, you guys,
Brock.
You guys are just, you have very similar body compositions,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, and we both had kind of similar characters.
He first debuted. The size, the amateur background, the MMA credibility. He built a legitimate MMA record, captured championships in multiple promotions during his time away from WWE, and when he came back, he positioned himself as exactly the kind of opponent Lesnar should want, someone who made the fight feel real. There were even reports that Lashley was promised the Lesnar program when he resigned. Whether that promise was explicit or implied doesn't change what it set up. Real expectations, real investment, real career trajectory built around a collision that kept not happening. The reason it kept not happening is instructive. According to reporting at the time, The faction surrounding Roman Reigns, which included Paul Heyman, who was also Lesnar's real-life creative confidant, actively worked against the Lesnar-Lashley match happening. The reasoning, as it filtered out, was essentially this: if Lesnar faces Lashley, someone has to lose. If Lesnar loses, even with interference, that diminishes the value of a future Lesnar-Reigns encounter. Reigns was the company's long-term priority. Lesnar, from their perspective, needed to be kept as pristine as possible for that program. So Lashley waited. He became WWE champion. He built his Hurt Business faction. He had genuinely strong matches. His character work was legitimately good during this period, and none of it accelerated the Lesnar match because the real obstacle had nothing to do with Lashley's performance. This is how backstage politics works at its most efficient. You don't need anyone to actively work against you. You just need someone else's priorities to be more important than your progress. When the matches finally happened, the pattern was immediately visible. Royal Rumble 2022. Lashley gets the win, but Roman Reigns physically interferes, and Paul Heyman betrays Lesnar. The pin happens in the middle of chaos that has almost nothing to do with Lashley's offense. Lesnar loses the match. He loses zero credibility. Weeks later, at the Elimination Chamber in Saudi Arabia, Lashley is pulled from a chamber match due to a storyline injury angle covering a real shoulder issue. Lesnar wins the championship back without ever having to engage with Lashley again. The loss is effectively erased in a matter of weeks. Crown Jewel 2022. 6 minutes. Lashley dominates, hits the Hurt Lock. Lesnar, apparently fading, uses the turnbuckle to push himself backward and lands his weight on Lashley for a pinfall, while Lashley still has the submission locked in. The referee counts 3 with Lashley's shoulders visibly off the mat. Lesnar wins by surviving a finish rather than conquering an opponent. And then, Elimination Chamber 2023, the rubber match, the one that was supposed to settle things. Instead, Lashley locks in the Hurt Lock again. Lesnar, unable to escape cleanly, hits a low blow. Disqualification. Lashley wins on paper. Lesnar destroys the announce table afterward to perform his frustration and recapture his heat from the crowd. Every single match had a mechanism built in to protect Lesnar from the clean loss. And the last one was the most revealing, because a DQ is the clearest possible signal that someone upstairs, or the talent himself, flat out refused to let the finish happen the right way. Here's where the story gets genuinely fascinating, and this is the part that most coverage at the time either missed or underplayed. Lesnar was originally supposed to win that Elimination Chamber match cleanly. That was the plan. A clean win would have closed the Lashley chapter and pivoted Lesnar into a WrestleMania program with Bray Wyatt, who had already filmed a segment on SmackDown explicitly challenging the winner of the Lesnar-Lashley match. Lesnar refused. Not the loss to Lashley, specifically. At least not primarily. He refused the Wyatt program entirely, and if you understand how Lesnar operates, what he protects, and why this actually makes complete sense, Wyatt's character required opponents to sell supernatural dread, rubber masks, psychological horror, mystical manipulation. The entire logic of a Wyatt program is that you're not just fighting a man, you're fighting something that unsettles you on a level a punch can't address. For a performer whose entire brand equity is built on being the most legitimate, physically dangerous person in any room, that's an existential threat to the character. Win or lose, you come out of a Wyatt program looking like someone who was scared of a light show. Lesnar wasn't doing it, and because he wouldn't do the Wyatt program, he couldn't win the Elimination Chamber match, because Lashley needed the win to have momentum going into a WrestleMania match against Wyatt instead. But Lesnar also wouldn't lose the Elimination Chamber cleanly to Lashley, so you get the disqualification. A finish that satisfies no one, protects Lesnar's aura, technically advances Lashley, and represents exactly what happens when irreconcilable demands meet in a booking room. Meanwhile, Lesnar agreed to face Omos at WrestleMania, a 7-foot giant with limited in-ring experience, no supernatural elements, a straightforward physical spectacle. Lesnar would win in under 5 minutes. Clean, easy, no threat to the brand. With Lesnar out of his picture, Lashley was rerouted into the Wyatt program. Then, Wyatt fell severely ill. The match was quietly cancelled. Lashley did not compete at WrestleMania, despite having been one of the most prominent figures in the company for the better part of 2 years, despite having held the WWE Championship, despite carrying main event program after main event program, he was just off the card. He described it publicly on a podcast. He talked about his kids calling to ask why he wasn't on the show. That's not a small thing. That's the human cost of what happens when a performer's career trajectory gets absorbed by someone else's booking priorities. Lashley's momentum never regained what it had before the Lesnar program. He had further issues backstage related to the Hurt Business faction and creative direction. Eventually, his contract expired. He went to AEW, and in interviews after leaving, Lashley was direct about it. The feud never reached what it could have been. He'd pitched a slow, MMA-style build, a genuine sense of two elite fighters preparing for war, never materialized. Massive egos and protective booking kept the ceiling low. It's worth being fair here, because Lesnar's behavior, as maddening as it was for Lashley and for fans, is not simply vanity. Lesnar's value to WWE is finite. Every clean loss he takes transfers a specific, measurable amount of his credibility to someone else. He has spent that credibility deliberately. Seth Rollins got a version of it, Drew McIntyre got a version of it, and Cody Rhodes, by all accounts, got the biggest piece of it. Those were calculated moments, saving the asset for people whose elevation the company could actually build on long term. From that cold, calculating perspective, Bobby Lashley in his mid to late 40s, not positioned as the future of the company, was not the right destination for that equity. The clean submission loss that Lashley pitched, that fans wanted, would have made for a great match. It might not have made for a great business decision, at least not by the metrics Lesnar was applying. The problem isn't really that Lesnar refused to lose. Stars protecting their positioning is as old as the business. The problem is that the company structure allowed those protections to override the legitimate creative and career needs of another performer entirely, and then offered Lashley no real alternative. He wasn't redirected into something comparable. He was left in a void. The Lesnar-Lashley feud is a case study in what happens when a wrestling company runs attraction booking without a safety net. Attractions are valuable. Special appearances create genuine events. But when the attraction's preferences become structurally unchallengeable, the collateral damage falls entirely on the performers around them. Lashley did everything right. He built his character. He had legitimately good matches. He stayed ready for a program that kept getting deferred, and finally arrived in a compromised form that served primarily to protect the other guy. Professional wrestling's most consequential matches, as the cliche goes, don't happen in the ring. The Lesnar-Lashley match that fans wanted, the clean, definitive, legitimately great heavyweight collision, never actually took place. What we got instead was 3 installments of a story that was always being told around the edges of one man's creative veto. And by the time it was over, Bobby Lashley was gone. If this kind of breakdown is what you're here for, liking the video and subscribing actually helps more than you'd think. Thank you very much for watching.